Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage publicist Cheryl Main.
女士们、先生们，请大家欢迎影视公关专家 Cheryl Main 女士。
Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Million Hours on Set. Unit Publicists talk publicity and marketing on location and around the globe. My name is Cheryl Main. I'm a unit publicist, and I'm going to be your tour guide for the next hour. Thank you. First of all, we want to thank the US-China Film and TV Expo, also Rogers & Cowan, and Sequoia Productions for giving us the opportunity to talk about who we are, what we do, why we do it, and the contributions that we make to the film industry. So, excuse me, we're members of the International Cinematographers Guild, which is one of the largest guilds in the entertainment field. We have 9,000 members made up of cinematographers, camera crew, unit photographers, electronic press kit producers, and publicists. There's approximately 600 publicists in the guild, but only 60 are unit publicists. And while we're an elite group of storytellers, it's sometimes difficult to explain what we do. When I first became a publicist, I told my mom, and she told everybody I was in publishing and I had something to do with books, which was not really what I was doing. She had no idea. So, for those of you who may not quite understand what a unit publicist does, we have a lovely short video for you. So, that's what we do, and now you get to meet 3 unit publicists that are the cream of the crop, my colleagues and my friends. And so if we could have our panelists come out. I think you need to move over one.
We need to go down one.
Oh,
Yes.
we need to make room for you.
We're always so busy organizing things that we don't get ourselves organized. But I wanted to introduce you to Michael Singer, Spooky Stevens, and James Ferreira. Okay, well, thank you guys for being here. This is exciting.
It's great.
So let's start off by talking a little bit about what we do. The unit publicity is highly specialized. It can be exciting. It can be challenging. It's a juggling act. Michael, talk a little bit about why you chose this profession.
Well, I always knew that I wanted to work on films because I've never loved anything more than film until I had a family. And I knew that I didn't have the set of skills to be a producer, a director, screenwriter, technical categories, but I thought that maybe I could do something in film that required a little bit of writing, like editorial writing, and some people skills. And so I fixed myself on publicity and started working for Paramount in New York in 1970. And a few years later, in '74, I met somebody named Eileen Peterson, who was something called a unit publicist on The Godfather Part 2. And once Eileen told me what it was that she did, I said, that's it. That's what I want to do. And then it only took another 11 years for me to get there.
Yeah, we move up the food chain very quickly around here. James, how about you?
Well, I sort of a similar path as Michael in the sense that I always knew that I wanted to work in the film industry because I loved film when I was a kid. And I got lucky enough to do an internship at Carol Co. Pictures many, many years ago in the photo department, which at that time I didn't realize was related to publicity. And I got to start to work in production, and I looked around at the people that were working on the set, and I looked at what was the most interesting thing that people were doing. And there were a lot of interesting things that people are doing. Nobody is on a set that doesn't have value and doesn't do something that contributes to the storytelling process. But the publicists looked like they had the most interesting job. They got to hang out with the director and the stars and the producers, and that seemed very glamorous to me. Little did I know. But I went back after that production to working at that internship at Carroll Co. and eventually managed to get into a job at an agency, and then eventually to a studio. And after all of those years of working that, I lost perspective of where I wanted to be. And I left the studio after a merger that happened that I didn't really like the way that it was going. And I said, what am I going to do? Oh yeah, I learned all of this because I want to be a unit publicist, because I want to be in production, because I want to do this in the field, around the world, on a set, and be a part of that process. And that's how I sort of figured that out.
Okay, so Spooky. As a member of the film crew, we wear many hats. We manage the assets. Sometimes we're shrinks, sometimes we're event planners, sometimes we run interference. Tell our audience a little bit about a typical day for a unit publicist, some of the challenges. I want maybe your best day, not your worst day. We never have bad days.
Never.
I would much rather talk about why I got into the business than that, frankly. No, the day is, it just depends. Some days you have days where you have a press event happening, or you have, in fact, the other day we had 20 dignitaries from China. They were all young film directors who came to visit because they wanted to see the set. They'd heard about it, and it was orchestrated through one of the studios.
What film are you working on, Spooky?
It's called Ad Astra, and it's being produced by Plan B, directed by James Gray, and it stars Brad Pitt and Tommy Lee Jones and Donald Sutherland and many others. But the point is that that was just sort of a social thing to do. There are other days when you have a huge, you have 60 Minutes coming, and they have certain things they need, and it's 2 camera interviews, and it's very complicated, and there's never a place to do it where it's quiet. Mm-hmm. And then there are days when it's just lovely, and you get to sit in your office and go through 6,000 images that have been shot by the still photographer and try to remember who these people are and what it is their function is, so that if it's ever published, they don't call me and say, how come you didn't ID me? Mm-hmm. And I say, because I couldn't remember what you did. And a lot of it is writing. There was more writing in the old days, I have to say, when probably all of us started, because we would put out releases constantly and put out information, and we would have, things happening. And now with the internet and everything being so immediate, a lot of that has gone by the wayside. It's still happening, but it's happening through social media. Does that help?
Help me. Michael, Spooky alluded to that we work with the unit photographers, we work with the electronic press kit. Can you elaborate a little bit on exactly, what we do and what they do?
Sure. For me, it's one of the joys of working on set is to collaborate with other people, and we find ourselves collaborating most often, I think, with the unit photographer and the EPK behind-the-scenes crew. And, unit photographers, of course, are artists in their own right, and they know what they need to do, and we need to let them do their work without interfering too much. But you can work together as a team so that if there's something going on which the photographer may not be in his field of vision, to call his or her attention to it, and they usually appreciate that greatly. Or, obviously, if you're asked to do a photo setup by the studio, then you have to work very closely with the photographer to coordinate all the other elements of the production and marshal all the forces to make that happen. Now, with the EPK crew, that's a really close relationship, particularly if you're asked to be a field producer and even the unseen interviewer, which I do quite a bit of, because I usually do location films. They can't always send a field producer from LA. And you work on for however many days they're approved to be on set to make sure they capture almost everything they possibly can, particularly the important things. But since we're there every day, we know who the key people are. We know who likes to be on camera, who doesn't like to be on camera. We tell them which actors they have to be sensitive about. And finally, if we do the interviews ourselves, some of us like it, some of us don't. I do because I'm able to ask questions even beyond what's on the list that I'm sent from the studio, to sneak in some questions of my own for either the production notes, which we all have to write at the end of the film, or for the occasional book that I occasionally have the opportunity to write.
And just a note for the audience, when you came in to this room, there were some images, photography from movie sets, and those are taken by unit photographers, just so you know. And they're also highly specialized, and if you saw the work, it's pretty spectacular. Well, let's talk about how our work takes us all over the place a little bit, because collectively we have worked in probably 30 countries. I've worked in 20 alone, so yeah. And so in that sense, I've worked in China. We've worked, as we said, everywhere. So we basically become ambassadors and diplomats. Spooky, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I started in Europe. I sort of came into this business through the back door. I had a very good friend who was a unit publicist, and in those days there was a big department because they were shooting in Spain, and I happened to be living there, so he asked me if I would come and be his secretary. So I was the publicity secretary on a number of films, and it was an education because, first of all, I'd never done it. I had no idea that it existed. And we were dealing with Spanish press and English press and everybody coming in, and how everybody had different needs for their particular publications. They didn't really send in television in those days. But from there, I ended up working, I just sort of became the publicity secretary for that part of Europe, and I was sent to Tunisia, where I learned, that I couldn't exactly buy bottles of champagne for Dirk Bogarde because it was illegal. But I did learn that the Tunisian milk factory was so it's all a learning experience. Everything that happened was like, oh my word, look at this that goes on here. Whoever knew? And every country has different cultures and different, you could say something to somebody one day thinking it was really funny, and find out later you insulted them because you shouldn't really, either broach that subject or you were too intimate. And, I'm sort of slap happy and chummy, and some places that's not appropriate, is what I have found.
Well, I found in Bulgaria that this was yes and this was no, and it got very confusing in the very beginning because I don't know what I told people. But James, how about you? Experiences internationally?
It's sort of disingenuous to say that working in this job is kind of like having a paid holiday, because it's not really a holiday. But there is an aspect of it that is like that. I get to travel around the country, around the world, and rather than just be in a place for a few days or even a week, I get to be there for a few months, and I get to settle in, and I get to learn a new culture, and I get to expand my own horizons, and then I get to bring that with me when I come back home and when I go on to another job, or when I'm dealing with people in post-production publicity, which sometimes I think we all sort of fall into some of that work. But there's a lot of challenges in terms of, like you were saying, Spooky trying to figure out, and Cheryl, what is the right thing? What is the right custom? Oh gosh, did I just say something I shouldn't have said? I just did a movie in Romania, and one of the biggest challenges that I had there, I work on a lot of horror films. I work with James Wan a lot, and whether he's directing it or he's producing it, it doesn't really matter. And on a lot of these horror films, we've started doing set blessings, or this week on a film I'm doing right now in Los Angeles, we did spiritual cleansing with a curandero, which I hadn't even heard of, and called Olympia. And But in Romania, we were doing another set blessing for the production and for the crew, and I was tasked with finding a priest in Transylvania to come out to a castle and do our set blessing. They wanted a Roman Catholic priest in a country that is 95% Eastern Orthodox. So that was a learning curve. We wound up getting an Eastern Orthodox priest, but it wasn't easy, and he didn't speak English. I'm not really sure how he found the castle, but it wound up being quite a beautiful ceremony, and the blessing that he did was almost like a song, and it, regardless of what the crew or the cast's personal beliefs were, it brought us together. And we were a crew of American department heads in a country with a Romanian crew. And that's something I think that we frequently deal with as well. We wind up going to foreign countries, and we have local crews wherever we are that we have to learn how to communicate with and wrangle into our world, because we are, as unit publicists, I don't know if you mentioned this, Cheryl, but I think it's important to stress, we are a department of one on a film.
That's a good point.
We don't have anybody working with us, typically. We don't have assistants. We don't have anybody. So that's one of the reasons why the people that we work with, like still photographers and EPK crews, become kind of like not our department, but our closest associates on a film set, because we're forging our own way. So I think that that's something that we deal with in foreign soil a lot. But it's fun. I wouldn't have it any other way.
And Michael, you have done a lot of big films outside of the U.S. and have had some tremendous experiences. Can you share one with us?
Oh, my goodness.
Pick one. You've probably got 1 million. We have 1 million hours.
Yeah, 1 million hours. There must be a few of those minutes that I can capture.
999,000 that he can't talk about.
Yeah, something of all. There are so many, but one that just immediately pops into my head. I did several films with Oliver Stone, and the first one was a film called Heaven and Earth, which was a movie about Vietnam, but filmed in Thailand. At that point, that was the most beautiful and exotic location that I had been to, and our production designer built an entire Vietnamese village in a rice paddy in Phang Na, near Phuket, for that film. And I just remember, and it was a true story, and the woman who the film was about was on set all the time, about her experiences. And I just remember, her name is Lê Ly Hayslip. I remember Lê Ly and a group of Vietnamese refugees who were living in northern Thailand, who had been flown down to southern Thailand to do the film, on one of our sets, which was a recreation of Lê Ly's childhood home, singing a Vietnamese song together. And it was so beautiful and so extraordinary to see her help to recreate her own childhood. I was in tears. And that actually happens a good deal. Many, many moving experiences, watching history recreated, watching people's lives recreated. I mean, working on films, I've been to ancient Macedonia, ancient Persia, the Jamestown settlement at the time it was built in the 17th century. We get to experience things that are dreamlike, and it's hard work, and it takes a toll on our family, certainly, but I don't mean to sound overly Pollyanna-ish about it, but it's a series of dreams coming true all the time.
And, I think that it's an interesting point that you bring up, Michael, and when I talk about the opportunities that we have, other crew members on the film don't really have these opportunities, not a lot of them. But I think that because we are ambassadors, both for where we come from here in Los Angeles, Hollywood, but also for our production, our crew. It could be 150, it could be 300 people on location shooting, and if any of them misbehave, we have to sort of be the ones to wrangle them in.
Right.
But we get to share those magical experiences. We get to learn these incredible things and be exposed to. We've all had these experiences. You know, I worked on Milk, which I got to meet all of these incredible people and who were still alive and a part of history. And you have too. We all have. It's a very unique position.
Absolutely.
Do you, I mean, a big part of what we do is we interface with the press. We interface with political entities.
Film commissioner.
Film commissioners to I've had a
Presidents
president.
of
I've had the president.
prime ministers,
exactly.
governors.
And that's, you know, we're there to build that, to build those relationships.
Goodwill.
Goodwill, and also, you know, to make sure that everyone, I mean, it's part of what we do, and that makes our jobs even more specialized. Anyone want to share any experience about that? Spooky, how about you?
Well, sometimes it's difficult because the governor or when I worked in Spain at one point, it was under Generalissimo Franco, and he always wanted to come to the set. And everybody trembled, I mean, not with good reason. I was stupid enough to not tremble. I didn't know, that he was a terrible dictator. I just thought he was the head of the country, and, you introduce him to Brigitte Bardot. And then you find out you don't, because she would say what she had on her mind. And you're standing there thinking, oh, dear, how do I translate this into Spanish? Because that was part of my job. And Brigitte did not speak Spanish. She spoke beautiful French. But this happened a lot, where you're in a position where, or I'll be translating at a press conference, and there is no way I can say, translate into the other language what my English-speaking actor or director has just said. And that's tricky. So you just make things up, is what you do. You're a publicist. You make it up.
I worked on a film. In Václav Havel, who was at that point a great writer, who at that point was the head of state of the Czech Republic, came to visit the set and wanted to meet one of our leading actors, and that particular leading actor was a method actor who was in makeup and did not want to break character to meet the head of state of the Czech Republic, and it fell to me to explain to Mr. Havel why he couldn't meet the star of the movie, and you have to think on your feet. And I just said, sir, you're a great artist. I'm sure you'll understand that when you're in the middle of writing, sometimes you just can't break the flow. He was lovely, but that is the kind of thing we have to deal with.
Okay.
I won't name the actor.
Let's talk a little bit about specialties, because even though we are all unit publicists, some of us fall into categories. I mean, I became the action star girl. I mean, I love explosions and muscle men, and so I was fortunate enough to work on some of those movies. Spooky, you work with auteurs. Your directors are Soderbergh and George Clooney, and I mean, the new movie about Billie Jean King that just came out that you worked on, and then James, you really carved your niche as the horror. You work in that genre, and then Michael, of course, works on huge tentpole films. All of the Pirates of the Caribbean. But in addition to that, Michael writes the definitive books about those movies. A little bit of an overachiever and makes the rest of us look bad, but that's okay. My question is, we work in different genres, but how does Is the job different?
No.
Yep. Go ahead, Spooky. She's ready.
I don't think it is. It's in my case, it's a little more tamped down. The big tent poles, the horror movies. Well, I'm not sure about horror movies. I've not done one, but you want stuff out immediately. The people I work with.
Stuff like what, Spooky?
Press. You want releases out. You want to invite people to see everything. I work with people who want it to come out fresh, and so we do less. We bank. We do a lot of things so that we have it, and when the movie's coming out, and then everybody, the directors, the actors, they'll all get out there and promote, whatever, but they don't want it on the set while it's happening. And sometimes that's difficult because sometimes the studio would prefer that they had a little more access, or sometimes somebody's, press agent has a big thing happening and, we have to have this person on the set to at least observe, and then you're tap dancing around that. So for me, it's become a little less frantic that way than it used to be, but more frantic in slightly different ways, where I'm sort of paddleboarding between. And the other thing is, with many movies now have many sets of producers, and so you have a lot of different companies who have different things they need, and or would like to see accomplished. And so, as I said, paddleboard, I realized why I said it. Because it's like, you're just like swimming, it's like upstream, downstream, around the stream, and you're trying to keep everybody happy and still give everybody what they need.
We serve a lot of different interests on a film. So we're, and to stay on topic in terms of what we do in terms of some of our specialties. I mean, just because I do a lot of horror films, it also doesn't mean I don't do other films like Milk or 100-Foot Journey. And but it is all sort of the same work. At the same time, we do serve a lot of different interests. We have the producers, and if there are 8, 12, 15 producers on a film, they may have different interests or different ideas about what the film is or how quickly they want to get the word out on the film. The director may have an entirely different idea. The actors, each one of the actors, may have different ideas about what they want to do. At this stage of the filmmaking process is one of the things that you have to realize as unit publicists, we're there at the beginning, and everybody else is there to make the movie. And so we're constantly trying to find our way in. Where is the in that we can get to do the work that we need to do without impacting the production schedule, the filmmaking process. And that is a challenge, and it's fun, but it's
tightrope walk.
And it's the same on all of these films to try and navigate that world.
Well, we have 10 different bosses on every different film. I mean, sometimes we have good luck and get to work with the same people over and over or a few times, but very often, one of the things that I always said I loved about doing units, because at one point I was at a PR agency for a while, for a number of years. And when I came back to doing units, one of the things I loved was like if there was somebody I didn't like, 3 months later, I never had to see them again or talk to them ever. But because they're gone, you create this family while you're shooting, and that sometimes it's fractious and sometimes it's a love fest. 3 months later, everybody goes away.
Right.
And it's always great when
they always come back.
That is true.
And the studio doesn't go away.
No, the
And let's
studio.
not forget, I mean, there's a studio involved, a production company sometimes, sometimes they have, the distribution is split between one studio has domestic, one studio has international. So we have to be mindful of that because things are marketed differently internationally. We wouldn't do the same thing for China that we do for Bulgaria, that kind of thing. So there's that kind of tightrope that we have to
also
walk.
releases. I mean, when I
Yes.
first started doing units and working in the film business, movies didn't open in Europe for months.
Correct.
After, and Asia,
Now it's
wherever.
Now it's day and date.
Yeah.
Sometimes before.
Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
before is right. Or they start streaming them.
Or they're streaming. So
Yeah.
the needs for material become more immediate now. In the old days, you could, all right, the domestic release, we know what we need to do. And then you have some time, breathing room to figure out what's going to go on across the world globally. Well, now you don't have that. It's all one.
No, it can happen instantaneously. I mean, we were talking about this backstage a little while ago about trying to get ahead of paparazzi or fans who may be on the street
Or
when
crew.
you're shooting in a public or crew by releasing an official photograph from the film before something can go up. But if you're out there on day one and you've got a crowd watching you taking pictures, it's up already. There's no way to get around that and get that official photo, or it's very difficult to get it out there beforehand.
Yeah, modern technology has pretty much robbed us of the illusion of control, if indeed we ever had that. But
That's true.
it's really true. The fact that everybody has a cell phone that's equipped with a really good camera means that, as James just said, the minute you're out there in front of the public, and you cannot shut the public down. You can try, but usually you don't have the legal right. And, it's not really the right thing to do either. To be a good neighbor when you're shooting in people's backyards or on their streets, you have to be respectful.
I find that to be another challenge when we're on location. People are excited that you're there, whether it's in a rural city in another state in the U.S. or if you're out in another country anywhere around the world, Korea and in Taiwan, China, it doesn't matter. Europe, people get excited that you're there, and you want them to be excited. You want that enthusiasm to be there. But when the media is coming at you and saying, we want to do a story, you're shooting in our city, you're shooting in our country, and you have to basically say no, because the end result is this movie is going to come out in a year, probably, more or less. And if they run a local story now, that doesn't help the film down the road.
And there are also exclusives that are arranged by the studio publicity department with large outlets that have international coverage, and we can't violate that. So sometimes we're often forced to say no to local media because we have no other choice.
Or I try to shift the focus, to be honest with you. For local media, give them an economic development story, because
always.
a movie,
Try to do
at
localized
least you give them
stories. Yeah.
something, no talent, no sets, but they get a producer, sometimes even the director.
Sure.
We talk a little bit how us being there impacts in a positive way on the economy. So those are some of the things that we can fudge a little bit, but don't you find it a little bit of a conundrum that our job is to serve the press, but we're often telling the press no? Like Spooky, you work on closed sets. James, I'm
do too,
assuming
sometimes,
most of yours are open or closed?
They're,
Or closed meaning no press?
even an open set is a restricted set.
Right.
So even when we do a lot of press on films that I work on, and they're not always, I mean, I work with Gus Van Sant, and those sets are typically closed. I work, with a lot of other people who, they're like, no, nothing. I've worked with Sean Penn, no, close set, which is fine. But on the films that are open, those stories that the journalists are writing and that they're there to write are embargoed. So they're not allowed to publish anything, even online, until until the studio tells them that the story is coming out, and they have to sign an agreement to that effect. So even on an open set, typically that I work on, unless it's been arranged in advance that they can run something, you still don't know that they've ever been there until the movie comes out.
We do try to do press conferences sometimes
Yes.
at a location. Doesn't always work out, and more often than not, these days production is saying, we don't have time for that, but it's always a really good thing to do and a goodwill gesture, and it helps tremendously to set the right tone.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit because we do live a gypsy life. I mean, it's one that we chose because we love it. It's exciting. It's a lot of hard work. But let's talk a little bit about how that impacts family life, because we all have families, right? Spooky.
I'm only going to say that in the audience somewhere is my husband, and he's here because he hasn't seen me for 2 months. And I'm working on a film in town. But by the time I get home at night, he says, "Oh, you're home. You want to watch the news?" And then he says, "Well, the weather's going to be good tomorrow. Why don't you just go to bed?" And this is a true story. It's really hard. It
really is.
And when you're away, another time, I've been very lucky to work on a number of films at home in the last few years. And he turned to me one time and said, "You realize you've been sleeping in your own bed longer in this 6-week period than you have in 6 years." And I thought, oops. Now he comes to visit, I have to say. It's not like I don't, but it just takes a toll. It's hard.
Now, Michael, you go on long jaunts for...
I have been out of town in the U.S. on a 7-month shoot. I've been, Pirates 2 and 3 shot back-to-back and overlap, and that was a 2-year assignment.
Wow.
Almost all out of the country or out of the city. The most recent Pirates of the Caribbean film shot in Australia for half a year. Months, and if I added up the months, the weeks, I would have spent years away from my children and my wife while my daughters were growing up. But let's look at the other side of this. They have always come to visit me. When they were preschool age, they actually stayed with me. So my daughters and my wife have had opportunities of actually living in places like Rabat, Morocco, Paris, Prague, all over the U.S., places we never would have visited, never would have had the opportunities to visit. And I would like to think, because they say so I believe them, that being exposed to the world like this has made an indelible change in how my daughters perceive the world now that they're young adults, 20 and 22 years old. It had a profound effect on them. We're a family that loves traveling, and yes, it's taken a toll, but we've all had opportunities that we wouldn't have missed for anything in the world. Although missing my younger daughter's high school graduation when I was in Australia was a little bit rough.
Well, thank God for Skype, maybe?
Yeah. There's where modern technology has really helped.
Yeah, and hinders. James, do you have something to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would just say that, for me and my relationship with my husband, it's, first of all, we're incredibly lucky, all of us that are up here on this panel, that have partners to have found people who are understanding of what we do for a living. For me, as much when I'm out of town or out of the country, and sometimes I'm in areas of the world that are inaccessible to get to for even a long weekend, and my husband works a regular, sort of 9-to-5 normal job. So sometimes he doesn't get to come and visit me. But we miss each other, but it's healthy. We get time away from each other. We get time to sort of have our own alone time. I don't know what it would be like to be in a relationship with somebody that I saw every day of the year.
Yeah, my wife and I have talked about that. A little bit of distance is something. Fred, how do you feel about it?
I wanted to get to our last question and then ask if any of you have anything that you wanted to add. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about technology and how that changing landscape changed how we deal with things on set and just in general with the press, the publicity, the marketing, streaming media, and how it's all changed. So let's start with James and work our way down.
I'm a little bit of the junior up here in terms of the number of years that I've been doing unit publicity. So things have changed rapidly in the last 10 to 12 years that I've been doing units. But I've been a part of that change personally, you know. I race out and embrace technology, and for me it's fun, but it's impacted the work that I do. We've talked a little bit about it. I mean, really, what I think, Michael, you said in terms of having control, or maybe Spooky, that we have this illusion of control, or we want this illusion of control, and it used to exist. As publicists, and going back to the old studio days, we used to tell the story. Now we're managers in a lot of ways. And one of the first things that I do, even before I get to a set, is talk to the studio and say, you know, do you have a digital social media memo that I can start talking to talent, actors, their representatives about what they can do, what they can't do. I think it was maybe even just 3 or 4 years ago, we weren't even having that conversation.
That's right.
The studios were still under the illusion that they could control what photographs, what audio clips or video clips went out there in the world. But I think they sort of lost that battle with actors, because actors get excited about the work they're doing, and directors, and they want to put the word out too. And when you've got your talent doing it, there's no hope. So that's when the studios came in and said, you know, let's figure out how we can manage this. You can post a chair back, you know, a director's chair back with the initial logo of the movie or the name of the movie on it, or you can post a front page of the script, or actors clowning around in the base camp where all the trailers are, as long as they're not in costume or makeup. There are parameters of control. But that's not a fail-safe. I worked on a film a couple of years ago where the script supervisor, who is the continuity person, who sits in front of a monitor all day long, next to the director with the producers, taking all of the notes of everything that's happened in every scene, and they take photographs of the monitor for their work. And these days, there used to be, you knew, like Costume had a Polaroid camera, and they'd have a big ring of Polaroids on the side that they could, you know, take pictures of the actors in costume, and that was their continuity. If they whipped out another camera, you knew it was like, hey, what are you doing? What are you taking that picture? You know, but now everybody's doing that on their iPhones or, you know, their Android phones or whatever, and you can't tell if someone's taking a personal photo. So on this film, the script supervisor posted on his Facebook, on a public posting, images from the movie. You don't anticipate that from your crew, but it happens. And yeah. So it's trying to get ahead of it and manage it, I feel like. But at the same time, it's a powerful platform, and you want to wrangle it as well and exploit it if you can to build buzz about the movie, because it's going to get out there. So why not make it good and make it fun early on?
I mean, I remember some years ago, not that many years ago, when somebody said, you know, on this, you know, do you want to tweet? And I didn't know. I have a parrot. He doesn't tweet. I don't understand this. And I just am not good with technological things. And, throughout the production office for years, there's always been this scream, Spooky needs tech help, somebody get down there. And it could just be my computer. But the idea of texting and tweeting it just is so far from what I think any of us should be doing, really. I mean, I just think in every area of our lives, it's too much, not just so much too much information, it's wrong information that goes out half the time. And then you're fighting it back. It's easier when it was more controlled. It was much easier.
Well,
Sometimes I just want to say, sometimes we're fighting right information as well. I worked on a film on location one time where the story of the film was controversial, and the studio yet didn't know how they wanted to market the film. And so, but the local press knew what the story was about because the location scouts were out there in advance talking to people in the community and telling them what we were going to be doing. So these stories would pop up, and I would have to call the journalists and say, how do you know that this is what the story is about? And they said, well, we know what it's about. Have you read the script? No. So it would live in print for a day, but I would manage to get the journalists to change the story online, which is where it lives forever.
Well done.
yeah, well, that's not an easy task.
No.
I did it without lying.
Well, I
just
can't
fudged.
quite get to that. Okay, well, we're going to wrap this portion up because we hopefully have some questions from in the audience. But before we do that, I just want to mention two quick things. That the Publicists of the International Cinematographers Guild, we put on every year we do the Publicists Awards at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. It's quite an extravaganza, 1,000 shakers and movers from studios and talent, and it's really quite fun. And also, we have a publicist directory that we have a limited amount, but I think we're going to be handing those out. So if anybody wants one of those. But now we want to open it, or maybe you already got them. So I'm just a little behind the curve, because that's how I work. I like to be behind things, and then I don't have to worry about it. But now we want to go to some questions, so thank you.
Here you go, sir.
Hi. I understand that a movie set may not be the safest place in the world to work, and I understand that there's training for union personnel on the set. I wonder if you could talk about your role in that and how you've been trained to deal with safety issues on the set.
Well, I can tell you that the Local 600 has a safe sets program. And we also have an app. It's the Local 600 Safety app that anybody can download. But if something happens on set, it always looks like it's really fun, but especially when there's explosions, we have stunts, we have car crashes. There are a lot of things that can go wrong and have gone wrong. People have died. We also work very, very long hours, sometimes 16, 18 hours a day. Then you have to drive home. We've had crew members die on the road. So this has become a very big issue, not just for our guild, but for all of the Hollywood locals, that safety is extremely important, and it's something that we take very seriously. And you're going to be hearing more about that. So thank you for that question.
Hello.
Hi.
There's a lot of USC students here, and I was wondering if
Yay.
anybody has any tips as to people who want to get into that industry. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't, because I got in through the New York Times ad 100 years ago. They don't even do ads anymore.
It's interesting because years ago, everybody always says to me, do you have a degree in public relations? Do you have a degree in communications? I don't,
me
either
neither.
way.
Me
I
neither.
think if you want to be in publicity, one of the good places to try to start is either at a studio or a PR company, because you'll get some of the basics there, and you'll be in a cosseted kind of place. Mm-hmm. If you've never done anything like this, and you're plunked in the middle of a set, it can be a little overwhelming. I mean, I always say that what I did was almost being an apprentice because I had several years as the publicity secretary. So if I had just been dropped into a film with no PR background or sense of it, it would have been terrifying. So if you could try, and sometimes through the universities, they have ways of hooking you up with a mentor program or interning sometimes someplace.
We're actually starting a mentoring program at the Guild.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about it, so...
We haven't started it yet. Local 600 publicists, remember that, and maybe, once we get it up, or call, and there are people who know we're trying to put this together. And that might be a way to start.
And I agree with Spooky. I mean, the advice that I had been given was to go work for an agency, which is what I did. I was lucky in that I knew, I had been working in production, so I talked to a producer that I'd been working with, and he helped me find an agency to work with. But after I went from the agency to work with a studio, I, as a vice president of a studio, had interns in our department. And I can tell you that every intern is not like another. And if you can get an internship at an agency, and there's a lot of agencies, personal publicity, or at a studio in the publicity department, it's an incredibly valuable position. I would hire the interns that shined in our department if we had an opening, or if somebody called me and said, hey, we're looking for an assistant, do you know somebody? And I would remember the people who really went out of their way to learn and work with us. And so if you do, or any of your friends manage to wrangle a great internship, I would just say, work it. And if you're copying a lot and filing a lot,
No, they don't.
know that would be, well, look, the work that I would have interns do would be the work that I would be doing if I didn't have somebody there, that I would be doing myself. So I never asked anybody to do anything that I didn't do or wouldn't do. And it's an opportunity to learn. If you're asked to file things or copy things, read it. Look at it.
That's what I
Take
used to do.
advantage of that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Shamelessly, I might.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you all for being here.
Hi.
Another USC student. Wanted to ask you guys a question about working with the behind-the-scenes sort of documentaries that are made with these films, because I decided to pursue this career because of what I saw as a kid, seeing these movies happen on set. And I'm curious about the balance between no magician wants to reveal their tricks, but also you want to give people an idea of how it's done.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, we shoot everything.
Yeah.
Everything there is. Then it's up to the studio and the marketing department as to how much they want to reveal, and by increments. Because, now you shoot footage that sometimes goes out virally while you're still shooting, things that go out just before release, after release, on the Blu-ray, extras, little viral pieces. There are so many different ways of using them, and it's a matter of what you want to reveal when you want to reveal it. And that is usually up to, the gentleman I work for, Jerry Bruckheimer, has very strong feelings about that, as most producers do. The studio certainly has strong feelings about it, so there's always a strategy behind it. But you shoot everything, except what the director or the actors don't want you to shoot.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, if there is one, and then we have to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Hi, I'm Manjari. I'm one of the AFI DWW directors. And my question is for independent filmmakers. When your budget is $2 million or less, we don't have the luxury of having a unit publicist. So what do you advise in terms of course, we would have an EPK, on set, but what do you advise in terms of having a strategy where we do not miss out onto something that a studio film, would have?
Well, I would say that it's not a luxury, especially on an independent film, to not have a unit publicist. The fact that you're asking that question means that you need somebody there to help advise you from that very beginning point. Typically, if you have an independent film, it means you have no distribution, right? So from that point, you're trying to generate the materials that you need to build interest, to get buyers, to create the deliverables that you need, and good ones, because you can market a film, but you can never go back and get those elements from production again.
I worked on a film that was $1 million, shot here in Los Angeles. Great director, young director, second movie, great cast. I did it because I loved it, because I felt I could help them, and that one day he was going to be making $20 million movies and was going to call me, and then I'd get my rate. But we have tiered movies, which are, you know, our rates drop, unfortunately, really kind of low. But, you know, the truth is, you're the ones that we can help the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because we are the strategists. We are the ones who collect the assets. We are the ones that come to you and say, look, we can do a little vignette, and this will help you for social media, and this will help you for this. And so it's that kind of thing. So when you're thinking about your budget, think about a unit publicist and the value that you're going to get afterwards, rather than the dollar amount that it might be, that line item that it might be costing you when you're doing your budget.
And there will always be a unit publicist willing and happy to work on
That's
films
right. That's true.
out of passion, out of interest, and they'll work at the lowest possible rate, because fundamentally we love movies and we live for film. That's why we're here.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
Our
much.
great panel.
Thank you.
Thank you for your great questions and for your attention. We really appreciate it.